On Monday, May 29, 2017, veterans of Foreign Wars Post 3208 honored the brave men and women who fought and died in service to our country at a Memorial Day ceremony at Pioneer Cemetary in Sierra Madre, California. In what would quickly become a standing room-only event, VFW Post 3208 was proud to present keynote speaker, retired Air Force pilot Lieutenant Colonel Dick Rutan. One of the world's most accomplished and decorated pilots, Lieutenant Colonel Rutan is considered a living legend of aviation. He is a war hero, aviation world record holder, aerospace test pilot and innovator, author, and an in-demand speaker who travels the country. At the age of 19, Dick Rutan joined the Air Force Aviation Cadet Program and later became a Tactical Air Command fighter pilot. He flew 325 combat missions in Vietnam, 105 of those in the high-risk, highly classified MISTYS program. He was shot down in September of 1968, ejected, evaded enemy capture, and was later rescued. In his 2 decades of service to our country in the Air Force, Lieutenant Colonel Dick Rutan earned the Silver Star, 5 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 16 Air Medals, and the Purple Heart. Dick Rutan's distinguished career in aviation was just beginning. After retiring from the Air Force, Dick joined his brother Burt, himself a legendary aerospace and aviation engineer, and founded Rutan Aircraft Factory and later Scale Composites, where Dick Rutan served as production manager and chief test pilot. Dick Rutan flew the test development program of many military and civilian experimental aircraft and set numerous world and distance records in his Rutan Long Easy. In 1981, Dick Rutan founded Voyager Aircraft, and along with Jeana Yeager, in a plane designed by his brother Burt, prepared to complete a record-breaking, around-the-world, non-stop, non-refueled flight. On December 14, 1986, a fuel-laden Voyager took off on the history-making flight.
For 2 or 3 days. Any turbulence they encountered at this point could break the airplane.
After 9 days, 3 minutes and 4 seconds, Dick Rutan landed the storm-battered Voyager at Edwards Air Force Base. 4 days after the historic flight, President Ronald Reagan awarded Dick Rutan the Presidential Citizens Medal of Honor at a special ceremony, a medal that had only been presented 16 times in the history of the United States. The Voyager is now proudly displayed and suspended in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum's Milestones of Flight Gallery in our nation's capital. After the world record-setting historic flight of the Voyager in 2001, Dick Rutan became the chief test pilot for X-Corps Aerospace. He set another world record flying the first ever rocket-powered experimental Long Easy, named the Easy Rocket. In 2005, Dick Rutan set another world record, flying the Easy Rocket for the longest distance in a ground-launched rocket-powered aircraft, flying from Mojave Spaceport to the California City Airport. In July of 2002, Dick Rutan was inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame in Dayton, Ohio. Ladies and gentlemen, VFW Post 3208 is proud to present an American war hero with 8 world aviation records, an aerospace test pilot, National Aviation Hall of Fame inductee, master certified flight instructor with over 14,200 flight hours, a Presidential Citizens Medal of Honor recipient, a living legend of aviation, retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Dick Rutan.
Pleasure to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Dick Rutan.
On behalf of Lieutenant Bell, the Commander Duncan McGilvery, fellow Vietnam or fellow VFW members, fellow veterans, friends, fellows, fellow Americans. There's one thing, we honor the veterans a lot of times, but there's another group of people that are not recognized that also serve. They serve a very difficult task, if you think about it. In 1967, I was on my way to Vietnam, and I was trying to find a place for my family to stay while I was in combat. And I learned one thing, that I was denied a couple of places when they found out I was going to Vietnam. And I could only find a place for her to stay if it did not tell the people that I was going to Vietnam. And as she sat there that whole year, we call them the blue car mothers, or those that sit in waiting. And looking back on that, when I have children also that are in combat, and as a parent, they sit and wait for the blue car to show up in front of their house, and what that means. And every time that happens, it's not good news. And I would like to recognize those who sat, whether parents or children, husbands, wives, were in harm's way. And if you could, please stand and be recognized and accept the gratitude of a grateful nation for your service. Thank you very much. I'm going to tell a story. My association one day with the general officer is called Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf. Ever heard of him? Let me tell you, if you're a young piss and vinegar combat guy, you want to be led by a go-get-em general. And in Gulf War I, that was Stormin Norman. And after that was over, I was honored to be at another event in Oklahoma. And it was a charity drive for a children's home. It was in a ranch, and Stormin Norman was there. And he was quite an individual. And there was a gentleman came up to him and said, he says, "You're a Vietnam vet, and I want to tell you all the problems that you Vietnam guys had." But he says, "I want to let you know that I was fully supportive. And I sat in my house and I totally supported you." I was a collateral damage in that event, because after he got through with this individual, telling him that he was more pissed off at him for staying at home while those long-haired, free-infested, dope-smoking hippies spit on our soldiers when they returned from combat. And right then I made a vow to myself that I would never stand idly by again when somebody disgraced our precious flag. But what is freedom? I was thinking about those people that would protest funerals, graveside for a fallen warrior. Those that came up to me at times and would say, "Hey, who the hell are you? You should have joined all the heroes that went to Canada instead of went to Vietnam." Now one day I was on stage with a group of people at an event just like this, and we were talking about how the reception some of us Vietnam guys came when we came back. And I turned around and sharing the stage with me was a gentleman from the Tuskegee Airmen. And I thought, those are a group of people that fought for their country and their flag and their freedom during World War II. When they came home, for those freedoms that they fought for were not given to them. They came over and I hugged them and I says, "You know something? One of my greatest disappointments is it says that so many of you did not live long enough to accept the gratitude of a grateful nation." You know, that's camaraderie. Those of you that are in combat that serve together, you know what camaraderie is when you get back. Those that went into harm's way, some of you that did not come back, there's a bond that's very strong. And my group of individuals for the MISTYS, we flew long duration missions, spent many hours over North Vietnam by ourselves, finding targets and directing them. I thought we did a pretty good job. But I never thought that anybody would ever, so many years later, would even care about that or care for what we did. And I do two things. Often I had the opportunity, the privilege of traveling to our nation's capital. There's two places that I always go every time I join there. It's the Vietnam Wall. I go down in that Howard place for the Vietnam vets. This is our place. This is our place of solitude. This is where we can have camaraderie again, and I can rub my hand over the names of those of my comrades that did not come home. And I give thanks for their sacrifice that I was able to live a full life. I also go to the Air and Space Museum and look up at the airplane that we built and flew it around the world too. I want to talk about another thing. I want to tell you a story about a person. You may know who he is, but anyway, we'll call him Misty 40. Now, Misty 40 grew up in a little town in the 50s, up in the San Joaquin Valley near Fresno. He would sit outside and he watched those contrails high in the sky. So high that he couldn't even see what was making them. But he knew that whoever was up there had one hell of a view. And he could not wait. This little guy, Misty 40, he had a lot of admiration, read a lot of stories about those combat veterans of World War II. And he could not imagine those crews that remember that 3 out of 4 were casualties that flew those missions out of the 8th Air Force over Nazi Germany. And it's not unusual that there would be 600 empty beds after one day's raid. But some of them came back and they were the only one out of their whole squadron that returned. All shot up. And I often thought, how in the world do those people get back in another airplane and do that again? I mean, who are these people? Who are people that can do that? That little guy grew up, graduated from high school, and he couldn't wait to go to college. He thought he had to get up there and find out what it looked like at the end of that contrail. He volunteered for the Aviation Cadet Program. And he spent a few months down in San Antonio, Texas in the summertime. From practical experience, I can tell you that Misty 40 found out that it's pretty hot in San Antonio. And the humidity is very high. There's also a lot of mean people there. First of all, they found out that they couldn't hear very well, because they were always screaming at you. And you could answer them and they would make you scream louder. And they would make you do all kinds of terrible things. And out of the 72 people that started that program, that got off that blue bus at the cadet barracks area in Lackland Air Force Base, there were only 12 of them of that class that ended up commissioned. And the only reason that Misty 40 was one of the 12, he was too scared to go down to the orderly room and tell him he wanted to go home to his mother. Misty 40 went to pilot training, his big dream. He wanted to be an Air Force pilot. Turned down an airline career because he wanted to fly jet fighters. And then one day in 1967, he found himself at the Officers Club in Luke Air Force Base. And it was rowdy. There was all kinds of debauchery happening. There were people coming back from Vietnam, and there was a whole bunch of them that were on their way to Vietnam. And he stood back in a minute one Friday night when all heck was going on in this party. And in his pocket, he had a set of orders to Vietnam as a combat fighter pilot. And he thought to himself, there's not another place and another time that he would rather be than right there in that time. And Misty 40 was going to find out about courage and about those people that flew in World War II. Like a lot of young guys that went over there full of piss and vinegar, Misty 40 went over there to win the war. We wanted to go and get it over with. And it was awful frustrating because we found that a lot of people didn't really care about getting it over with for some reason. But once you strap that jet fighter on your tail, and Misty 40 heads for North Vietnam to find targets and direct strikes against them, that's a different thing. you were there and you were doing it. Now they have about camaraderie. I'll tell you an experience that Misty 40 had one day. He was just coming off the tanker for refueling, going back into North Vietnam, and he heard somebody call Mayday, an F-4 Phantom that was on a reconnaissance mission coming out. And the airplane was on fire. A small fire, not much of a fire in the nose of the airplane. And Misty 40 joined up, told them that they had a little fire in the nose, and they said, okay, we're going to go ahead and bail out. And Misty 40 thought he was talking to two pilots, especially the pilot in the front, with his white helmet. Now, the reconnaissance missions that were flown were generally flown by company-grade officers because they were very dangerous. 500 feet, 500 knots, straight and level, which you never do in North Vietnam, to survive. Sometimes field-grade officers, but very rarely, never a flag officer. Misty 40 did not know that in the front seat of that airplane was an Air Force fighter pilot, Lieutenant General Bob Worley. Yeah, they were on fire, but now they're over the Gulf of Tonkin. They're straight and level, ideal conditions for an ejection. You sat there and watched the back seat eject. The rocket propelled the airplane. From the airplane, the pilot came out, the parachute opened. Wow, it opened and there he was hanging. That was really cool. But then he looked in the front cockpit and it was full of fire. And the ejection seat had failed. And he sat there and watched the only general officer emulated in the front seat of that F-4, and stayed right beside him all the way to impact on the beach. Another time, Misty 40, just before dawn, saw an F-105 pilot get shot down. He didn't see the airplane go into the jungle, but he did see the smoke. As he went over there to investigate this airplane that crashed, just by a glimpse, maybe 3-second glimpse, he could see the color of the parachute in the top of the jungle. He memorized the actual location and then the parachute disappeared. As he came back around, he called him. And it was strobe 02. Strobe 02. He did not respond. The parachute was gone, and after a handful of minutes, he circled around and still could not make contact with the F-105 pilot in the jungle. But he found out that he could pull up and he could dive at the point, and he was able to make radio contact for a handful of seconds as he pulled off. Are you down and you're okay? Pull off. Next pass. Yes, I am, but I can't move. I have a broken back. The sun was going down, and we had to wait till morning for the rescue. We put him to sleep. He says, we'll be back here at first light. Hang in there. We're coming back. Now, those of us that flew over North Vietnam, we kind of had an unspoken relationship with our government. And two things. One is, it says if you are not captured and you were able to communicate and give us the code word, each pilot had a certain code. And when you shot him down, and I did that a lot, Misty 40 did that a lot, he'd call them, and if they give him the correct code word, then we come in and attempt to rescue. He verified himself that it was who it was. The next morning, Misty 40 came over the target with his afterburner going and woke him up. I don't think he slept much that night. You pull up and he dive at him and he says, are you still there? Yes, I'm still here. How are you doing? I have a broken back and I cannot move. I said, stand by. We're coming to get you. The North Vietnamese set up a flak trap. They could have captured him easily, but they set up guns all around the strobe pilot. The first helicopter that came in was all shot up, and he barely was able to translate away. Another helicopter come in, he got all shot up too. Both of those helicopters were so shot up they could not ever fly again. An A-1 Skyraider that support that was orbiting and he got hit. He was unable to eject and he died trying to dead stick into the Ben Hai River. So rescue was different. and difficult. But there was a fellow comrade down there. He had a radio. He was not captured. We would never, ever leave him. As the attempted rescues went on all the way that morning until noon, multiple aerial refuelings. They would come in, they would try, we were taken out for other higher priorities, extreme frustration. Until at noon, I was to be relieved by Misty 40 was going to be relieved by the afternoon Misty. His name was Wells Jackson, and he came up. And just before Misty 40 left, the word came, announcement. King headquarters has determined, rescue headquarters, that we're going to give up and leave him. It was too dangerous. We have determined that we cannot go and get him. And Misty 40 thought, wait a minute. He's talking on his radio, and he's not captured. We will dig a trench and sail the Missouri battleship in to get him. Misty 40 was incensed. He could not believe it. The other rescue forces that were orbiting overhead, ready to support a rescue, could not believe it either. Misty 40 was a young captain. A young captain. And he called and he says, he was incensed, and he says, who made that decision? And it came back and it says rescue headquarters in Saigon. And Misty 40 says, who was the person that made that decision? He said it was a general officer. And then it finally dawned on me on something, or Misty 40, I'm sorry. Misty 40 determined that he was the only person that could talk to the downed pilot. Because he's the only person that knew how to dive at him, talk to him, and get an answer. And it realized that Misty 40 was going to have to tell him that we were going to abandon him to die. And I thought, that son of a gun. Misty 40 thought, that son of a gun. He's the guy that made the decision. I want him to tell Misty 40 the exact words to say that we're abandoning him to die, a fellow aviator. The exact words. And all the other forces came up too, and they said, yeah, we want to know those exact words too. Because we could not believe that they were going to leave him to die. Misty 40 was relieved that day at noon by Wells Jackson. And as Misty 40 climbed out of North Vietnam and crossed back into friendly territory, he was heartsick. He says, I'm not going to come up here anymore. They violated a prime directive. How could they do that? He went back and landed Officers Club at Phuket. Baby bottles of empty beer were surrounding him on the corner, dejected. And as the sun went down, Wells Jackson walked in the door with a big smile on his face. I says, and Misty 40 says, Wells, what the hell are you smiling about after just what happened? And Wells Jackson said, Dick, we got him out. He says, you what? You got him out? He says, yeah. The general could not come up with the words to leave him. And they went back and they got him out. And one of the most incredible rescues. And it was all on tape. And you can listen to it. It was a Jolly Green helicopter pilot. His name was Lance Egan. And Lance was a Coast Guard pilot in exchange to the Air Force. And he came into a hover. And there was a brand new one-striper. His first day in combat. He'd been in Vietnam 2 days. And he was the PJ that was going to go down on the ground and find him. And so they lowered him through the jungle. He rounded around and found the pilot. He called the helicopter over. No ground fire this time. Everything was quiet. And Sergeant Talley now, as Talley vectored the helicopter in, over. He says, okay, lower the penetrator hook with a little seat that goes to the jungle. And as it came down through 300 feet of canopy, he hovered. Now the Vietnamese, they weren't dumb because they'd opened fire initially on the helicopters and they got away, the first two. So this time they were going to wait. And they knew that once the wire went down and the survivor was being pulled up, the helicopter couldn't leave. He was trapped. And so they waited. Everything was calm. Finally, Sergeant Talley called on his little handheld radio. He says, "I got him, pull me up." And a handful of seconds later, Sergeant Talley grabbed the microphone. He grabbed the radio and he started screaming. And in the background was intense automatic weapons fire. And the words that Sergeant Talley said would cut your heart out. A true hero. And he said he looked up at the helicopter and it was being shot to pieces. Hydraulic failure, fuel pouring out of it, plexiglass raining down on his shoulders. And he started screaming, cut me loose, take it out, take it out. Cut me loose, take it out, take it out. Lieutenant Egan stayed there in a hover, just like a Sunday afternoon. And it must have been an eternity as he pulled that cable up through the jungle. As he cleared the jungle, they translated away, landed at the rock pile just across the DMZ. That also helicopter never flew again. Because something else happened. Why did the general change his mind? And it finally dawned on him something he should have knew initially about the camaraderie, that we never leave one of ours behind. After 105 missions and 2 tours, Misty 40 pulled off a target on fire one day. But unlike John McCain, Misty 40 was an Air Force trained pilot and he got rescued. Sorry about the Navy guys. But this meeting, the meeting far back, he thought about as that young cadet that sat there and given a piece of paper, a little booklet that was cadet knowledge. And the code of conduct, it talks about a lot of things, about never giving up, being true to your country and your comrades. But the very first article, now as that little high school kid sat there under the blanket with a flashlight, trying to find some time to memorize this things going through aviation cadets, he remembers the first article. The first article said, "I am an American fighting man, and I serve in the forces which guard my country and my way of life." And it didn't mean a whole lot to him then. But after he saw his fellow warriors being shot down in flames over North Vietnam, and some successful rescues and some that were not successful, now he understood. Now he understood that what true camaraderie is. He understood why these people could get back in those cockpits in World War II and do that thing again. All you vets of time gone by, that sacrificed so much, you did it so they could have the total freedom to say anything they wanted to, do anything they wanted to, disgrace their own country if they wanted to. Now, thank God we have freedom for that. And as long as guys will show up. There was one, I believe it was one last thing that was very impressionable to me. Being a Vietnam vet, that long war, and especially the POWs that returned. One of the first ones that got off the plane at Clark Air Force Base after enduring 6-7 years of unspeakable torture. His name was Jeremiah Denton, a naval officer. And I try to imagine, he just got off that airplane where just a handful of hours before, he was in an interminable prison in Hanoi. And one of the first things he said when he got off, he stood there and he looked at the audience and he said something so profound, I'll never forget it. And pardon me, when I repeat his words, I may choke up. He looked around and he says, I consider it an honor to have had the privilege of serving my country under difficult circumstances. And that's the epitome of the warrior, the epitome of the veteran, who sacrifices so much for our freedom. I have another story that I want to present to Lieutenant Commander McGilvery. And it's a story of heroism by Lance Egan. Lance Egan epitomized name, rank, and serial number, and do not disgrace your country. And I want to present this to you, make it a permanent record of your organization, and I would hope that our fellow would read those words and remember what an honor it is to serve. God bless and thank you. I believe he was one last thing that was very impressionable to me. Being a Vietnam vet, that long war, and especially the POWs that returned. One of the first ones that got off the plane at Clark Air Force Base after enduring 6-7 years of unspeakable torture. His name was Jeremiah Denton, a naval officer. And I try to imagine, he just got off that airplane where just a handful of hours before, he was in interminable prison in Hanoi. And one of the first things he said when he got off, he stood there and he looked at the audience and he said something so profound, I'll never forget it. Pardon me, when I repeat his words, I may choke up. He looked around and he says, I consider it an honor to have had the privilege of serving my country under difficult circumstances. And that's the epitome of the warrior, the epitome of the veteran, who sacrifices so much for our freedom.